Welcome to Let Me Know How It Is, a pop culture podcast about animation, TV, movies, comics, and all things geek. Today, we're celebrating 25 years of Batman Beyond. This is part 1. I'm Zach Slater.
I'm Frank Melman.
And I'm Clifton.
January 10th, 1999. Batman Beyond premiered with its two-part pilot Rebirth. Set in Gotham City 50 years from now, a long-retired Bruce Wayne has passed the mantle of the Batman to 17-year-old high school student Terry McGuiness. Sporting a new high-tech bat suit and facing a brand new set of rogues, this Batman series is a fresh take on the Bat mythos, while also acting as a continuation of events from Batman the Animated Series, with a dash of cyberpunk mixed in. Produced by Warner Brothers Animation, Batman and Superman animated series producers Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Alan Burnett all return as creators, along with newly promoted producer Glen Murkami. The series ran for 52 episodes and aired on Kids WB 25 years ago. Can you believe it?
Wow.
I cannot.
No.
So we're going to get into Rebirth in just a minute. But first I wanted to ask you guys, because we're all old enough to remember when it premiered. So what did you think about the idea of a teenage Batman set in the future when you first heard it?
I thought it sounded dumb.
Okay.
I thought it sounded impossible to pull off.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
I just thought it was an idea that I'm like, this is gonna suck. This is gonna be because I think it was around the time of the was it Spider-Man Unlimited?
Yeah, that was going around that
Yeah, it was
time. A
close.
little before, yeah.
And that was my thought was, oh, they're trying to do Spider-Man Unlimited with Batman.
Right.
And it's rare that these things are good past like an issue or two. I mean, I know it's not a comic book, but
right.
that was my thought was, as I find as we do more and more episodes of things and the reveal of things, I'm like, my attitude is usually like, no, that's going to be terrible. And
It's your knee jerk.
right, that is my straight from the hip. I'm like, wow, that's going to be terrible. And this is no different. I thought, and again, there was no reason to doubt them at this
Right.
point.
Right.
It's not, this is not the point where they're entropy takes over and it all just turns bad.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just had, but as I thought about it when I was preparing for this episode, I thought, wow, I really do. I'm just a naysayer from the jump on a lot of things.
Right.
So
It's your defense. It's your armor.
I guess. Yeah. Well, again, like this, but this is, to be fair, I guess I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. Again, it's one of those, when there's three, at this point, there's 3 series that are just great. And then, well, this one's going to be terrible. No, there wasn't 3 at this point. There was only 2, right? Was just
Series? Yeah,
No,
it depends how you,
there's Batman, there was Superman, and there was the New Adventures of Batman.
Yeah,
okay.
depends how you
Justice League
count
yet.
Batman.
Okay. But I'm saying there was we didn't have Justice League yet.
Right.
No.
Correct.
No.
And that, I'll put it this way. When I saw comparing the 2, that one, I certainly didn't naysay. I was like, let's do it.
Right.
But there was also a lot of groundwork laid with the fact that, for a lot of those Superman episodes, those are, DC Comics presents, where Superman teams up with a hero, which you're basically doing your rollout,
Right.
at least I thought, for what could possibly be a Justice League show.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the Batman Beyond, like, as an idea, I just thought, he's at that point, like, Bruce Wayne is so central to being Batman. In the comics, I don't think we had even had like Nightfall. Maybe had Nightfall happened.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Nightfall's
Yeah.
happened. So, but again, it was not we've seen what happens when someone else tries to take over the mantle of the Bat. It doesn't go very well.
Right.
Right.
And even from like a standpoint of when I was trying to put my head in the idea of the creators, I went, even they would think this was a bad idea.
And they did.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a funny, there's funny stories about the development, the birth of the project. But
Mhm.
yeah, no, I just remember seeing the blurb about it
Mhm.
that had been announced. I might have seen like an art if they had released the Batman Beyond design or something, and just being like, that doesn't look good at all. Like, I was just not sold on it. I was not sold on it
Right.
initially from just the concept. That's
Right.
what I'll say.
I was just looking it up, Frank. Spider-Man Unlimited actually premiered after.
Oh, did it
Really?
really?
But it's
Wow.
close. Yeah,
Okay.
it's October.
It
So
feels
it's the same
it
year.
feels
So
like
I
it should
wonder
have
if
been earlier.
if there was a bit like if they were just like walking across the street and seeing what the other guys were doing.
Right.
Right.
You know, I'm
You
sure
know,
they probably
like-
talk. They probably talk in the same circles. So I'm sure someone
Yeah.
might have been like, "Oh yeah, we're working on this."
Because
Yeah.
I know in the schoolyard we were all saying,
Mhm.
"Oh, they're just ripping off Batman Beyond."
Okay.
When now looking at it, I'm like, that's impossible because they would have been in production around the same time,
Mhm.
Right.
right? Like, anyway, I mean, they wouldn't have been. Say what you will about that show, they wouldn't have been able to get Spider-Man off the ground that fast
Mhm.
in the summer, basically.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'm going to confess over here. So believe it or not, to listeners, there was a period where as much as I talked them up, where I kind of fell off the wagon of the Bruce Timm, Paul Dini stuff, and it was kind of the tail end of Superman, tail end of Batman when they were just like clearly like cranking them out, and admittedly, I was a little like over opinionated about some of them because a lot of those episodes have turned out to be like favorites of mine, like Nighttime.
Mhm.
Which I just needed to learn more about the comics,
Mhm.
to kind of see like that was at the time when like Silver Age was illegal,
Mhm. Yeah.
and then you do like a Silver Age day, and
Taboo,
now
right.
like you get older and you learn more, and you're like, oh no, like I really like that episode. So, but this fell like right around that time, so I was not watching them religiously like I was. That said, for some reason, I actually thought this sounded kind of cool.
Okay.
Mhm.
I don't know why. I agree. It shouldn't. I shouldn't have. But I guess I just didn't know what I didn't know. But I did, in preparation for it, I managed to find a couple of old like Wizard magazine like articles.
Which I'm
Mhm.
sure that's where I first saw. That's where I first
Yeah.
probably ever
Yeah.
heard about it.
Yeah. So we'll put those in the notes because I managed to find them, and I'm looking at like the article that they wrote where they interviewed Tim and Dini,
Mhm.
and I'm like, man, they just like they spoiled everything. Like
Oh.
all of it's in there where it's like they're talking about bad guys who are like we're not using like any of the favorites, like nobody's
Right.
coming back.
Yeah, that's a pretty hard and
Really?
fast rule for that show. Is
Yeah.
let's not do the typical rogues, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They're like we're not doing any of that stuff. We got like the Royal Flush Gang and we
Mhm.
got the Jokers and,
Right.
and I remember going like, oh, that all sounds cool.
Mm-hmm.
Except for
You know?
the couple times they do bring somebody back, but
Yeah,
Right.
except
they
for
have
the few times they do.
justifications for it.
Right.
But no, it's funny that you mentioned Wizard because as I was prepping for this, I was thinking of other Bruce Timm stuff, and they had again a much different roster for Justice League that was teased in Wizard. But I don't recall reading about Batman Beyond in Wizard, which is strange because I was pretty, I as my roommate at the time used to say, it was like, are you ranting at Wizard again? I'm like, well, there's so many things that get wrong, John.
Right.
So it was one of those things where, I'd bring it home with my stack of comics and he would just watch me eat tacos and then just rant to myself.
You just
Why?
fume. You just fume with a taco in one hand and Wizard in the other.
Yes. So, but again, I don't recall. I'm sure I read it, but yeah, I just remember more so the Justice League stuff. Again, it might have just been I didn't really think it was a good idea, so I didn't read the article. I don't
Right.
recall, or I've since forgotten it, one or the other.
Right.
Well, I set out to go into the pilot, but I guess let's get into the development really quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Since we brought it up.
All right.
And yeah, like this was a hard sell to the guys who made it.
Okay.
Right.
Also,
There's a special feature
Mhm.
on the first DVD set where they sit down and they basically tell a short story about how it came to be. Did you watch that one, Zach?
I didn't watch it gearing up for this, but I watched it a million times. I did brush up on. I read Tim's Modern Masters where he talked about the development in there,
Okay.
Mm.
also in a Comixology interview. But yeah, so go ahead though. You drive on this one.
The standout there is that apparently it was the brainchild of a guy named Jamie Kilner, who was the head of programming at WB Network at the time, who called him, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Alan Burnett, I believe, into his office and told them that their Batman show, which was The New Adventures of Batman, what was the title of it?
The
Is that the
Batman
title of it?
Afternoon Fun Time Hour or something.
what was the WB Batman title, Zach?
I think it's
It
New
was
Adventures.
the new Batman Superman
Hour.
Yeah.
With Shazam.
But it's become colloquially referred to as the New Adventures of Batman.
Okay.
Right. So they were on the New Adventures of Batman at the time, and head of programming at WB told them it was skewing too old. That it was older kids and non-kids watching it, and they wanted a show that would bring in the younger demographic or would secure the younger demographic for sure. And so they thought at first that he was pitching them on making changes again to the Batman show they were working on. And then they realized he was telling them a whole new show was what he wanted. And they said that when the words teenage Batman came out of his mouth, that they were all like, huh? Like
Right.
they all kind of had the reaction, I think, that you and I did, Frank, there in the room. But that they started riffing off of the top of their heads at that meeting a lot of ideas that became Batman Beyond that we know. And that Jamie Kilner was just like, yep, that sounds like a show to me. And so they asked, like, okay, like, you want us to, work on some stuff and come back in a week or so? And he's like, no, you got a green light. Go make the show. And that's how it started. That was the birth of it.
Yeah. So and we talked about this in the past too, where this is the period where they were working on simultaneously Batman, Superman, and pre-production development on Batman Beyond at the same time, which is nuts to me. Yeah, I mean that's exactly the story as I read it too. The only thing I had heard Clifton and Frank too was that Jamie Kellner apparently used Buffy a lot. Like he was saying Buffy a lot as reference. Which in the magazine that I read, the interview I read, Tim and the interviewer were like, which I'm confused about it because like Buffy is not a kid show.
No.
They're like,
but it was a massive hit for the WB at the time. So.
Yeah, exactly. And they initially thought like teenage Batman, and they were thinking like teenage Bruce Wayne. And they were like, well, that doesn't make any sense because they were thinking like their own continuity and stuff. Yeah. And I remember I saw some story where they were like, after the meeting, like they're all like in the parking lot, like what are we gonna do?
Right, like Paul Dini's like, I'm gonna quit the show.
This sounds stupid. Why would we do this? And then and then somewhere one of them got the idea to like, like what if we set it in the future, right? And so it doesn't like stomp on our continuity, and it's a teenage Batman, but it's not Bruce. Right. So our stuff all happened, and then it's just like a continuation of that stuff. And they were still a little lukewarm about it. From what I remember, Tim going into the office that Monday and talking to Glen Murkami, like, hey, come here, shut the door. And he told them sort of like what they wanted him to do. And it was Glenn that was sort of like, no, that sounds all cool.
Right. Yeah.
Like there's like, we could do this, we could do that, we could do that. And they said sort of like it was his excitement and exuberance that sort of made them all kind of go, oh, okay, maybe there's something to this.
And also the fact that he was going to be doing most of the design work where they're like, oh, if you're that excited about it, you're going to do it. Like, we're all in. Like, we'll go with it.
And then I'll use this as a segue to get into the show. And then so after they're riffing on ideas, it was then when they came up with the idea that like, well, what would cause Bruce Wayne to quit or to stop being Batman? And then one of them had come up with the idea. I forget if it was Burnett or Dini.
I think it was Burnett. I think Burnett.
They said that, Bruce Wayne is out. He's already older. It's midpoint in between the shows, and he has like a heart attack and has to resort to picking up a gun to defend himself. And that was the moment that they were like, oh yeah, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Like, and they were all in. So let's get into Rebirth.
All right. The 2-part pilot.
So that's how it starts.
Right. He goes to get Bunny. What's her name?
Vreeland.
Bunny Freeland. Right. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it, the pilot, when I'd watched Rebirth. And sitting down and watch it, it still holds up. I think it's still good.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I think that open is really great. I think worth noting.
Open strong.
They weren't doing teasers at this point, right? Okay. Batman and Superman didn't have teasers. They just had like, your intro and then you went into the episode. This one started with a pre-credit sequence that takes place, like we said, like, I forget if it says 20 years or 25 years ago.
I think it's 20.
Yeah, I think it may be 20. I think you're right. And yeah, Bunny Vreeland is kidnapped. She's the daughter of Veronica Vreeland, who was a supporting character that you saw in Batman the Animated Series.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Wayne in a futuristic suit.
In a power suit.
Yep. Goes to help out, and some kind of mix-up.
Right?
Yep. No, it's a great. No, it's truly. I really, really love the opening of this sequence, and you know, he's taking those guys out and has a heart attack, and there's a gun nearby, and he's about to get clobbered with a wrench, and
a giant wrench.
Yes.
Yep.
A comically oversized wrench, actually. But yeah, and they get the upper hand, and he has to basically resort to, like you said, pulling the gun to save himself, right?
Yep.
And then has the moment of like, what have I done?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an intense open. It's an intense open for a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
And that is, like I said, when I first saw the premise or read the premise probably in Wizard Magazine and thought it sounded dumb, I still somehow watched the first episode. I don't think like I set out to. I think I just happened to be around and it was on. I was like, oh, I'll put that on. And then I see that, and then I'm won over to the show. So that's all it took, was watching the pilot. It was like, oh, like this isn't what I was picturing at all. Because that is intense, and it is gruesome and brutal. And
yeah.
Yep.
And then you see him in the Batcave, shutting out the lights.
Yeah.
And then we roll the intro.
Right.
Well, we get the I always remember the line from him saying "never again," that basically turn off the lights.
Yeah. And there's I listened to part of one of the commentaries that again are available on DVDs. That's what we miss in the digital world. No special features anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
I miss when there was like a whole cottage industry of special features on stuff. So if you still have the DVDs, you can find them. But yeah, they'd mentioned in that they explicitly used orchestral score for that opening segment, like the same type of music they were using on Batman the Animated Series and Superman. And they did so that it would just juxtapose the intro that we get. So you'll have like the classic orchestral, like, right. Batman the animated series score run right into like techno electronica. And they did that intentionally. And
yeah.
I hadn't quite realized that before, but it works really, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, right into that theme, which is just, man. If you're not pumped up to fight crime after that, I don't know what's wrong with you. Because every time I hear it, I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's go right now. Get me my flying Batmobile. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, watching episodes on Max and they put the little skip intro. I'm like, no.
Yeah, you should lose your much like the same way when they put X-Men the animated series on Disney. People are like, no, if you skip the intro, you lose your you automatically lose your subscription.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about this. There's no reason in the world to skip this intro for any reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
I agree. No, it's great. Worth pointing out too that they worked on this before they had any animation back.
Okay.
And so it's something I don't really quite notice because there's some actual animation in it, but a lot of it is like still static images.
Yeah, or like very like barely timed animatics. So you're seeing like something move every 8 frames.
Yeah. Yeah, and so and we've talked about it. I think famously Darwin Cook is the person who put the intro together, and I saw Tim talk about it a little bit, where it wasn't like storyboarded or anything like that, where like he approved. It was just something that they just went back and forth on, where like he just like ongoingly was telling Bruce like oh, I got like this idea, or I got this idea, and Tim would then kind of like give him some notes just based off of that, and then he would just like come in with stuff, and he was like, "Oh, this is great!" Like,
right?
Yeah.
I just shot this on my kitchen table last night. How you like it?
Right, the lazy Susan.
Yep.
Yeah, that part's awesome.
It is. No, it's a great. Again, it's a fantastic intro.
Yeah, no, it's music's awesome. Music's great. Let's get back into the episode. We can talk about the music in a bit. So we come back and we are now 25 years later?
Yep, another 25 or so.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, either that or another 20. I think it was 20. I can't remember.
This to me is one of the real genius moves here, that it doesn't set a specific year.
Mm-hmm.
It's all like I like the way that the future is always moving relative to when now is.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like I think had it I think had it actually said flatly, you know, when would it have been? 2049. You know, I think you run the risk of like, I think like Transformers the movie, when it opens, like it is the year 2005, right? Like
Right.
you run that risk, but I think it's also not that there was any development for like a Justice League show or anything like at the time, but Bruce Timm had a really, really cool idea about like Batman Beyond is always 50 years into the future. Whatever
Right.
now is, whatever Batman stories you're doing now,
Right.
Batman Beyond is 50 years from then. And so I just think that that's kind of cool, that it's not necessarily set hard, that like, oh, now that show takes place in 1999. It's always moving with,
Right.
you know, whenever now is. So I think that that's really cool. But so yeah, so what'd you guys think of the opening sequence with the Joker on the train?
I kind of remember that Terry was somewhat heroic. I didn't remember being quite so much heroic. You know, it seems very much that he's and again, spoiler for a show that's been off the air for a long time. I don't know if we can talk. Are we going to talk about what's the Justice League Unlimited episode?
Oh, epilogue?
Yeah. Are we talking about epilogue or no?
We can down the line.
Right. Or the future. But
right.
Epilogue, that was a question that I going into it, I thought, well, did they know at the time that they, this was something that they kicked around, and then or was it an afterthought, or the idea of epilogue, just the idea of whether or not who Terry is, because that was my question in watching this open again, or watching this opening episodes, was again he's quite athletic, he's quite like he's doing like Akira moves with the speeder bikes later. That was one of those questions I had, and rewatching, I'm like, I don't remember it being like, I thought there was like, he does. I remember the fight at Wayne Manor. I remember that part, but I didn't remember it being quite so like, he's mixing it up, right? It's not.
Yeah, he's very punchy.
Yeah, it's not, and it's not. And in watching it, the other thing is in my mind is I remember it being, for some reason in my mind, I remember the pilot being after they did. Was it Last Son of Krypton? That the opener for Superman Adventures? Yeah. Okay, so you do Last Son of Krypton. Last Son of Krypton's 3-parter. It's 90 minutes. It was 90 minutes when it premiered. I remember that. The 90-minute premiere on Kids WB, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But for this, in my mind, I thought, well, this is 90 minutes too, right? And it's not. Nope. It's only 44. And I had that, in watching it, I definitely had that moment of when Terry's doing all that stuff. I mean, we see him wrestling with like his Flash Thompson guy.
Right.
The guy that's kind of the bully.
Nelson.
Yeah.
Seth Green.
Yeah, he's kind of the bully. And we see that, and then we get an idea like, well, okay, he does like gym stuff, but it doesn't explain where his punchy stuff comes from. Right. I mean, he's got a little chip on his shoulder. He's got a little kind of rebel without a cause kind of thing going on, but it's not really a moment where I was like, well, this explains why he's able to do all this stuff. Yeah, he's got no suit yet. It's just him. Did anyone else have that feeling when they watched it? Because that's how I felt watching it when I rewatched Rebirth. There's a move in later on when he's outside of the club and the Jokers come and they start causing trouble and he starts fighting the Jokers off. And there's like one move where like he jumps up onto a street light and manages to kick one of them off the motorcycle. Right. And it's like 90% a gymnastics move. Mm-hmm. It's something you would see Nightwing doing. Right. Like it's right at home with Nightwing. Right. And I was like, whoa, like that was one thing. Like I didn't quite remember him being so flippy. Yeah. Yeah, I would, because again, thinking of the runtime on it, I would have liked, coming back, I would have liked to have had a little bit of, explanation where, just even if it was, a moment of where he gets in the fight after the Nelson spits on him and he punches him. Even if it was a moment of like in a guidance counselor's office or whatever, with his mom being told, or his dad being told, hey, listen, he's really smart. Like he's off the chart smart. He's really athletic, but he's got this attitude problem, and that's the reason why he's not living up to his potential or whatever, to explain some reason why he's able to do all this stuff.
Right.
But we don't get that because it's only, it seems, it's packed, like the episodes are packed, and I like the episodes, but I did have that, like, unlike when I watched it previously, I had that question of, well, how's he able to do all this?
Right. I like the fact that the Jokers are, again, there's no real explanation to it, but I like that sort of Batman's greatest enemy for some reason gets relegated to being like inspiring a street gang.
Yeah.
I
thought that that idea, like, I've no problem with that. I think that's a cool idea. It's a good way to be like, he's never really gone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's a neat idea, and I think also one of the brilliant things about the show, not just this episode, but like as it went on throughout the seasons, is they had kind of like a cardinal rule to just kind of keep things loose.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's not a laziness thing to me. I don't think it was like we don't want to come up with what happened to Jim Gordon and what happened to Nightwing and all that stuff. I think it was just sort of like they wanted to keep it nebulous and mysterious, and I think that that's a neat feeling watching the show, is that you don't know what happens to everybody.
Right.
No.
And so even though I know that there's a comic book story there,
right,
to be written about, like the person that's like, I'm going to start a gang,
right?
But it's a neat visual for sure.
Yeah, it is. I do have to point out, like, a very strong Akira reference, because the gang in Akira is the clowns, led by somebody named Joker.
Okay.
In Akira, who's like their big motorcycle gang boss who wears clown paint. They all wear clown makeup and clown helmets. So it's them, bringing in some of the stuff that's influencing them, some of the anime, the cyberpunk anime of Akira especially. But it works. Like, it works so well in this world. So it's not just like, a reference. It's not just an homage. Like, they were able to take something that they were paying tribute to something, but also making something that works in their context. And that seems to be like a lot of what they first doubted about the show. And then what won them over was like making all of this work in the context of the stuff they've already made.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is a great example of it. Cause like it's clearly Akira, but like in this world, it works and it makes sense and it fits in the context, and it's just cool. It's just cool looking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So clearly Terry is athletic. Like you said, like he's on the wrestling team, but and I do remember that being something that was announced kind of early. It wasn't in the Wizard things, but I remember hearing that like that Terry was going to be like he was going to have a chip on his shoulder. He was going to be a kid that like kind of got into trouble,
right,
a lot, which I thought was an interesting thing. So that puts him, in conflict with his father, who he's living with. You find out that his parents are divorced. And he gets grounded after having starting a fight at school, or not starting a fight, but participating in a fight. He gets grounded. He storms out of his dad's place, goes to meet up his girlfriend at the club, which is where the second Joker's motorcycle scene that we were talking about occurs. And he battles them off, and then
while wearing a helmet, he does put on his helmet. Stands and practices. S&P was, I'm sure, saying, put a helmet on that kid.
Yeah. The good guy. The bad guys don't wear.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so as he's trying to get away, which I like that moment. I like that sort of he's again being the hero. And then there's so many of them that Dana's just sort of like, get out of here, go. Like, and it's just sort of like, I don't know, it just has sort of a like they're packing heat kind of feeling to it. Like, you know what I mean? Like it felt kind of real.
Right.
Yeah.
That moment. So he starts leading them away, and we get to I don't know where Wayne Manor is, but if we're going into the Nolan verse, the Palisades is where Wayne Manor is.
Right.
And there's an old man out there who's still pretty spry.
Right.
And helps out Terry fight off some bad guys.
Who is it?
It's Charles Foster Kane.
Oh, okay.
Right.
It's that I like all that stuff. Again, it's creepy, and it's great. The fact that he's just out there.
and that he sticks it to some young punks.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Goes a little Gran Torino on them. But no, I that sequence is great. I mean, Old Man Bruce is awesome. I love Old Man Bruce. Ace is great too.
Sure, yeah.
I like that whole sequence. I think the whole sequence is fun.
Yeah, I do too. You're right. It is kind of ominous and moody, and I think Ace is a great addition too, because that was one thing I remember from development interviews and stuff. They were like, well, Alfred's dead,
right?
So who's he with? Like who's in that house with him? And they're like, oh, like maybe he's got a dog, which also like coincidentally came back to like another note that they got from the earlier Batman shows where somebody asked like, can he have a dog? And they were like, and they're kind of like hated the idea, but it was like, okay, well that was our way to get Ace in for them a couple of years later. They were like, okay, yeah, he's got a dog.
Yeah, right. Something about these scenes overall, the opening scene, this scene, that I hadn't really thought of before in watchings until this time is how frail Bruce is. Like, right. I mean, we see him like, he messes with these punks, he messes them up. And then immediately is like, oh, like I need my cane. Like that was right. Too much for me again.
Yeah. Right. And pills.
And then as the show goes though, even early in the show, like that starts to not be a thing. Like his ailments don't seem to be affecting him. Like once he's back in the saddle kind of vicariously through Terry, which I like to think that that's what it is that like he's got something now. He's got something to live for. He's got a legacy to carry on, and like that's energizing him. So now he's got something. He wasn't fighting for anything before when he was up there in his empty mansion with a dog, and now he's got something.
The other thing, it's funny that you mentioned that, Clifton. I didn't really think about that because he is kind of bag of bonesy at first, and really kind of iffy about stuff, and then as the right away gets into more physical stuff. But that's also true in The Dark Knight Returns by Miller and Klaus Janson.
Right.
Like the fact that he's, it would be a good death. That whole opening sequence with the race the car, and then once he realizes, no, he's got to be Batman again. His, it's the great stuff of, the rain on my chest is a baptism, all that imagery of like, nope, this is what I needed. The creature writhes and snarls in my gut and tells me what I need. Yeah. And it's suddenly like he's back to being Batman. It's like, the last 20 to 30 years just fall away. I mean, granted, he still has moments where he has old, moments of being an old dude, but at the same time, there's a lot of that in Dark Knight Returns as well. And I wonder if that's where they borrowed it from or just decided, nah.
Yeah, it could be. Right.
It could also be totemism. The idea of, once you slip on that animal mask traditionally, from the hero stuff, from the hero's journey stuff, you basically transcend all your human frailties. At least that's the idea. That's why I want a lot of animal-based characters in comics, once they slip the mask on, it's like that whole sublimation of their personality to become something more. There's a little of that too.
Right.
I remember putting in my notes, I'm like, this episode is pretty darn tight.
Yeah, that's what I was saying this is a better way of saying when I was like, it's packed. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in it to roll out. It's a tightly
plotted episode, and that medication thing, sort of that like attack he has out there, gets Terry in the house, right?
Yep.
It's a moment where we see Terry has a compassionate side. He's helping the old man that helped him,
right.
And then, but it's also the moment where he sees a bat in the study,
right,
in a clock,
right.
Tries to help the bat and then ends up opening up and finding a stairwell behind there and goes into the cave.
Yeah.
Which there was a moment that I always remember this line, but I guess it hit me when he sees the bat suit.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, wow, like Terry's got kind of like a techie side because he's able to to assess it
quick,
really fast.
Yeah, he's a bit of a Terry Sue. And I hate that term, and I hate the Mary Sue as a term, but I was like, man, they've front loaded this kid with a lot of abilities that aren't explained. Again, getting back to what I was saying, but go ahead.
But it also made me think. I wonder if it's just sort of like the way your toddler can navigate a touchscreen better than you can.
Sure,
you know what I mean.
Oh no, you're right. Yeah, there's there's a lot of that. I've got a lot of that going on right now in my own life. But getting back to what Clifton was saying about the bat trapped in the clock. was just the idea that it's also a bigger metaphor for him helping Bruce.
Yeah.
You know, the idea
Yeah.
that it's the reverse of the bat crashing and dying basically in the study, and you know, we've seen it a million times in different things.
Yeah.
You know,
I shall become a bat.
and I shall become a bat. I mean, it's again
one.
getting back to
Yeah.
Frank Miller. It's in Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Year One. That's what I always go back to is that scene of he's failed at his first foray out into being, you know, the what's the homeless vet? No, that's what he does. The homeless vet bit.
Yeah.
And the guy immediately calls him out as like, this is not you. Before he has the gimmick together of being Batman. And then you see that the wounded bat that was amended in another story to be one of, I think it's Langstrom's test subjects, if I remember correctly. That ends up in the study. And then that's where he gets the information of, you know, I'll be a bat. I shall become a bat. That whole thing. But again, I do like the idea of it. It's a bat that's trapped by the clock, which is much like kind of Bruce is sort of trapped by this and also liberated by the idea of once I get back into, like Clifton was saying, living vicariously through you, my life will be better. And so will Gotham City's, really.
Right. And so he heads back home and then sees that, you know, the police are there and runs in. His mom is there. His mom, you know, can't get the words out that his father's dead, but, you know, he runs in to check and you see ha 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 spray painted all over the walls. And this is a point where I think the music like really stands out and is really beautiful and really noticeable. I think, dramatic wise, not just like, you know, the techno,
right,
you know, rock music that you got, as the score for this show. But you see, so it's the moment, it's the orphaned moment, you know, which is a nice, like, it looks like it's a coincidence that the Jokers hit it, but it's in retaliation to him fighting off the Jokers, but then it's not, right? Like, you know, like I like this sequence a lot.
It's a smart bit. Like, I like the fact that it's there, you know, and again, there's enough, I guess there's enough Joker's mischief as opposed to Joker's real crime that you don't really know whether it is or not at first.
Right. No, I mean, like, I'm impressed. I'm really impressed rewatching it. I hadn't seen it again in a long time, you know, and then, so there's the disc that, Terry's dad has left for him in the event of his death, you know, that's now among his things that now he's, you know, taking and moving in as now he's moving back in with his mom, and his little brother. And that's when we see, there's something up at Wayne Powers and, this Derek Powers guy who, you know, appeared to be, you know, is very Lex Luthor,
there's a lot
benevolent business guy, beloved business guy, you know, in the city, has some crooked dealings. And what I like about that bit is I like that his instinct is to go back to Bruce. That on one hand, it's like, well, you're connected to this. It's your company. And you've just sort of like taken your eye off of the ball.
Right.
You
basically let everything go.
But also you're Batman. Help. And like, it's a nice, like Terry's getting in over his head moment. And as Terry Sue, as you said, he is, it's a cool moment that he's coming to him and he's like, you know, just like pleading for his help. I think, you know?
Right. But getting back to Terry's dad for a moment, if we can, I don't, you know, it's always interesting who Andre Romano casted for voice actors.
Yeah.
You know, I think we've joked a couple times. I don't know if we've done it on the podcast, just the idea of like, it's people that she shows that she likes.
Right.
So therefore they get voice work, or maybe she just hears them and thinks, oh, that would be an interesting take on the character. But Michael Gross.
Yeah.
Stephen Keaton. He's only in it for a very short time. That's along with Terry's you know, innate abilities, it seems like, to do stuff. For me, that was the other glaring like hole in the episodes, I guess, was I know it's shorthand that he's got a chip on his shoulder and, you know, his parents are divorced and he's, I guess, stuck with dad.
Right.
You know, that he's living with dad and his brother is living with mom. But it does feel, at least again on rewatch, it felt kind of like, well, there's got to be more to the story, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't remember if it's ever touched on again what the deal was. Like, I couldn't recall. I was trying to. I was racking
why he was with his dad and his brother was with his mom. Like, what the family story was.
That, and kind of like why, you know, I get that you know you're upset that your parents are split up. I totally understand that. but I don't understand. Like it was so it's very one note. It's very
Yeah.
one dimensional as a relationship, and I just had a moment of like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like I had that moment of again another scene or two that just would have explained or been like, oh well, dad was stuck with work and was because again when Terry's like, hey, I need to talk to you, and he's like, I'm busy, I'm working, and like that was was that it? Was that all there was to their relationship? But it didn't. And then, like I said, just the fact that it's Stephen Keaton always makes me laugh from Family Ties.
Yeah.
It did make me wonder, like, what the custody laws in Gotham are.
Right.
Just because I'm very close to somebody who handles divorce.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it did make me wonder, like, that is an interesting situation where the young son is with mom, but the older one is with dad. Right. And clearly, and he's not 18.
Right.
He's not an adult yet, right? Like he's still a minor.
Right.
Clearly. Yeah, it did make me wonder. That was one area. And there's one bit where Bruce says, take the disc to Commissioner Barbara Gordon. Right?
Yeah.
And that was another bit where I went like I just felt them. I felt them like, man, if you did 3 episodes, this would have been a sequence where you said take this to Commissioner Gordon, and the audience would have been like, what? Like he's still alive?
Right.
Right. And then it would be a separate scene where he goes and sees, and it's Babs. Right. Barbara.
Right.
I'm with you. I think this is an episode where I do wish they had a little bit more elbow room and did a 3-parter. So that some of the family dynamic stuff was a little bit more, and so we had a little bit more time with dad.
Right. Because like I said, that was my only thing. That was my other big thing. I was just like, well, I get it, and you, as you write stuff, you sometimes need, your placeholder or your, well, we'll go, and just, that's what it always felt like to me as watching it was, this was something that definitely should have had more meat to it. And it just was kind of like, nah, his dad, he didn't get along with his dad, even though he's with him. Because again, like what you're saying with, not to get all weird about it, but yeah, with Gotham City custody laws, I would think he'd have some say on who he's going with, but maybe not. I don't know. But it just felt very much like he was a device to get Terry to the point of being upset and having to go back to Bruce and being like, look, they killed my dad.
Right.
What that's like, that kind of thing of like, basically, what the city does to parents.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You got to help me out here.
So let's hit part 2 a little bit faster.
Okay.
What'd you guys like about part 2? I'll just put it that way.
I think the action sequences are pretty cool. Like I think but again, it gets back to the whole thing of, with Terry stealing the suit.
Right.
Again, a moment of, again, if we had seen, like, I watched this one and I watched, like I said, like a couple other episodes and then, just picked and choose stuff from different, like, scenes from online. But there's a moment where I had the idea of not everyone can just throw in a bat suit and glide over the city and be okay with it. Most people would be screaming their heads off and throwing up. The idea that when they have the zero gravity highlight bit in the ink, with the ink episode that's after this one.
Right.
Even if that had just been the idea of like, well, that's where he gets the ability to do this and has no problem, would have been something. But I felt like it was also a moment of, he's doing all this other stuff, so he could do this too.
Right.
But no, I like the stuff. I like the bit with just the one shot of Bruce listening to him getting his ass kicked. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Because Bruce just is like, I told you.
It's the real anchor of this episode. So I'll try and hit it in broad strokes. So basically, Bruce is reluctant to help Terry. Terry steals the bat suit anyway.
Right.
And goes out and he's like, whatever, I'm gonna go take the guy down that killed my dad, because he surmises that it's not the Jokers, that he was killed by Derek Powers or by somebody connected to Derek Powers, who runs Wayne Powers.
Right.
Basically for his dad not cooperating and not going along with the like the gene, not the gene, but like the chemical weapons that he was developing. Right. And so Terry steals the suit. He goes to Wayne Towers. The Joker's thing was all a cover up, and basically he goes there just what I like about it is it doesn't seem like he has any illusions that he's going to be Batman.
Right.
It's just that this suit's a tool to help me sort of achieve it. Right. Like I'm going into a dangerous thing to take down some killers. That's how I read it. I don't know if you guys had a different sense of it.
Yeah, no, I don't think he's got no long-term plan in
Right.
mind at that point. I don't think he wants to bring the people to justice that took
Mhm.
his father from him, and that's his whole game.
Yeah, that's a means. I think of it. It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting when you get to the line at the end. You know, when in the climax when they're fighting in the ship
Yeah.
as it's going. That whole bit when they get to the. Do you want to wait till you get to that line, or do you want me to say it?
No, you can go ahead.
No, just a bit where it's he's basically fighting with
Mr. Fix.
yeah, his the right hand guy, and he says you think you're something for a guy who thinks he's Batman. He's like, I am Batman.
Right.
I always the line. I like the line. I just don't know how earned it is at that point.
Right.
But no, I think it's a means to an end at that point. I think where he's very adaptable to what we've seen with him in the rest of the episode. I think the idea that he's adapted to this as his means to get whatever he needs done
Yeah.
is more a testament to his character than anything else.
It's still very tight.
I do like that line.
It's a good line.
Yeah.
No, it's a good line.
I do like the read. And I don't know if it's just because he's like, there's no Batman, so I'm Batman now. Because
Right.
at that point he's on the outs with Bruce because he went to Bruce and was like, do your job,
Right.
Batman, or
Right.
Bruce Wayne of Wayne Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And if you won't, I will.
Right.
So
I can do it.
I think it's kind of just a continuation on that train of thought. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tight episode, but I agree with both of you. I
Mhm.
like the line, and I also it's again I do think it's a bit rushed, but I think a lot of in the episode is rushed because it's 2 episodes only.
Yeah.
And I hate to keep harping down on that because I think it's a really effective 2-part pilot.
Right.
But one bit in there. So we were saying that we like the kill button
Right.
on the suit. So basically, when Bruce finds out it's stolen, there's the suit is rigged with a kill switch in case somebody else gets their hands on it.
I mean, it's no surprise that he's got one, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so
who amongst us was like, "Oh no, that would never happen." I was like, "That would absolutely happen."
that's it. I mean, it's a great moment when he's like Wayne, they're gonna kill me,
Right?
like
Yeah.
and which again gets me like so you wanted it more kid friendly.
right.
Mhm.
That's my whole thought. Like through all of this, is I was like, wait, like you like this is your vehicle to get kids, like
Right.
younger kids, because you're not making a show for them.
No,
Mhm.
Old Man Bruce is willing to let his protege basically die. I mean,
Yeah.
no, he's not at that point. But no, because again, they linger on that you hear him. Like I said, you hear him getting beat up, and they linger on that shot of Bruce, and Bruce is like his emotions don't change.
Yeah.
That's what I love about that shot was like that. Like I was waiting for a glimmer of like, oh well, I got no, his emotions don't change. He doesn't go through any kind of like it's all behind the mask of his face, so which I think is really effective. Just that scene is just great because you have that moment of like, well, maybe he's gonna. And I did have that moment of, and it's a line. It's not in this episode again. Well, I think if it had been a 3-parter, there's the scene in I just want to say it's Inc. I can't remember what the episode's called. It's one right after this one, after Rebirth Part 2. But in it, it's the scene of it's a bit of exchange between him and Barbara, and he says that the line of and she's like basically messing with him about another one, basically another kid for
You wrangled another errand boy.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
just the idea of and he's like, I didn't, you all came to me. That's what he says,
right.
which
He's
is
like,
not,
I didn't wrangle anyone,
which is not true, which is so not true. Such a lie. For her maybe, not for the rest of them. But just the idea of, here's another, it's a very different, it is very much the idea of another kid for his one man's war. Another kid. But the only difference is this kid is now, he's that much closer to this kid because it's almost like Professor Stein and Ronnie Raymond Firestorm, where he's like, I'm in his ear constantly.
Right.
I'm giving him chemical equations, but in this case, I'm telling him what to do to not die as he's doing this, right? And again, I think what again it goes back to what Cliff had said was the idea of he has to choose to let this happen. I mean, I don't think Bruce had been cold enough to just let Terry get killed.
No, of course not. I mean, I do think that's the moment where he hears he's in actual trouble, and then it's like, okay, it's not just you know,
He's not faking.
he's not just a punk kid just out for
Right.
thrills.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yeah. No, I'd say I like the bit too where they're like it's Batman and they're like, what? Like
No,
you know?
they almost because that's another nice bit too. Is like we talk between Powers and Mr. Fix.
Yeah.
That part was like, it's Batman. Like, it's Batman? What do you mean it's Batman? It's like
Right.
that. I love that idea of like, no, there's been enough time that enough shines come off the apple that
Yeah.
not enough people are concerned about Batman showing up. I mean, at that point, it's a good, like we said, about 20, 25 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's enough time for him to definitely to kind of recede and to sort of be, relegated to like boogeyman stories or parents telling kids, if you don't listen, you don't eat your broccoli and go to bed, Batman's going to come and get you or whatever. But yeah, I think the idea that it's laughable that I don't know if it's laughable for them that he's even there or the idea that he exists. I couldn't quite get the read proper, but I was like, yeah, it's funny that they're not too impressed.
Right. So what do you think about the, so we're spoiling it for everybody. So,
Right.
So, Terry gets his man, gets the guy,
right.
At least one of them, Fix.
Right.
We get the sense that Fix is the guy that actually like pulled the trigger.
Right.
Right.
Derek Power wasn't out there doing stuff at the time.
That Powers wasn't doing it, but so he gets Fix, but Powers is still out there, looming. And
right.
I love the moment where you get Terry after the morning after, and he's it's kind of like a hangover scene a little bit. Where like he's just,
right.
He's slept in and he's sore everywhere, and
Right.
and there's like Bruce Wayne's at the door.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I like this bit a lot. Where he comes in and basically offers Terry a job, and I like the layers to it. I like I like that the dialogue works for his mom.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, it's just this is where the tightness comes in of it. Where like he helped me out once.
Mm-hmm.
Your son helped me out once, so I thought maybe he would like to come work for me. It all tracks. It all makes sense.
In hindsight, it reminds me of, oh yeah, I've got the Stark internship.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's now looking back at on it. I'm like, oh, this is totally the bit they stole for for the MCU stuff with Spider-Man and Iron Man. The idea like, oh no, I've got this. Yeah. I got this young protege who's basically working with me.
Stark showing up in his apartment in Civil War.
Yeah.
It's the scene. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So no, and I dig the welcome to my world.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. It's a good bit.
Right. Well, the other thing is, one thing that I do like is, and again, I didn't really put this together till I watched it. Was when they show that the bit when he's showing the arms dealer guy about the progression of this nerve gas stuff and how bad it gets and how quickly it gets. When you have the bit in the climax where Terry hits the canister and exposes Powers to the stuff, it reminds me of Batman '89, where kind of like where Michael Keaton Batman does the bit of reflecting the bullet back at Jack, which tears up his face, and then he falls in the vat of chemicals, and then we get the Joker, which I thought that was kind of reminiscent. I never really put those two scenes together in my head, but now I do.
Yeah. No, I didn't think of that either. That's a good point though.
But having a hand in his what could have been, should have been his ultimate nemesis. Because again, one thing I did notice was the idea of continuity in this as well. I watched other episodes, the fact that no, this is supposed to follow one after the other, and for the most case, right? Which I don't really think they had that in mind for the other two. Like obviously things fold back on that and they come back to revisit stuff, or when a character comes back, it's kind of a villain or whoever comes back, we dovetail back to whatever happened before. But this would seem to be more episodic.
Yeah.
And I always felt like Blight as a character, which is ultimately what Powers becomes, had a lot of legs. And I just feel like they didn't really want to have that be a thing.
Right.
Yeah, there's a few things in the show that I feel like they started to set up out of instinct. And like that's one of them where they'd be like, yeah, like this is going to be his Joker, like this is going to be his guy.
And it's a good, and the thing about it, it's a good, like even though he looks kind of like Dr. Phosphorus,
right?
It's a good bit, like it works.
And that's something else. Like that's the thing. But then I think they had their mantra of like we're not gonna Like, it's not going to be like the other show. It's not going to be like the thing. And I think they shied away from it because they're like, we don't want, like, we're not going to do Joker Beyond. And then they kind of, I feel like in some cases skewed too far to be like, we're not going to do anything that somebody could think of as like his Joker.
It reminded me, Clifton, it reminded me a lot of like Smallville's no tights, no flights rule for so long, where I'm like, by the end of it, you have everybody else in the world wearing a costume. So what does it matter? Give the guy a super suit.
Yeah.
And I haven't read this anything, but you know, in hearing you talk about it, Clifton, it jumped to mind.
Yeah.
One of the things that they were saying, because they were just cranking episodes out and development was so fast, what they did was they didn't really have like here's this character's story and this is what his design going to look like. In some cases, they actually did. They just had like James Tucker and Glen Murkami just do designs.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, that looks cool. Like, what's that guy's deal? Right. And so you had like a neat design, kind of like, I guess, like the way they did the X-Men.
Okay.
Initially, right? Not like, Giant Size #1 X-Men, right?
Like the Dave Cockrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
where it's like that guy's cool looking. Like, what's his story, right? And my understanding is that like Shriek came about that way, Ink came about that way, and I don't know, but I mean, I could see that possibly maybe Powers was that way.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Like maybe they were just sort of like setting it up by instinct, and it was sort of like, okay, yeah, we don't really want to nail ourselves down to all these repeat bad guys, perhaps.
What's weird again, but that's a weird idea because again, at this point, you know the shows you're doing, right? Like repeat business is part of what makes these shows work. Like again, some of the best episodes of all those series are because of the fact that you've established a character and a villain and you've had moments to basically say, well, this is what it was for this one episode, but as character development goes along for the villain too, let's revisit that, or let's look at this from a different way, or whatever. And I think again, it just so like I think what Clifton said was absolutely true, is they just skewed so hard away from that, which doesn't make, again, the show that you're making is the people want to see the Joker show up. Not so much now because he's oversaturated, but I'm saying when you have those episodes with, oh, it's cool. It's like a character I haven't seen in a long time, like Ra's al Ghul or whoever. But
they do break that rule. They do break that rule every once in a while, and one of them they break pretty quick. I mean, Mr. Freeze comes back first season.
Right, pretty early. You're right. I agree.
But they said in the special feature thing when they mentioned their rule about no Poison Ivy Beyond, no Riddler Beyond, but we really like Freeze, so we brought him back early.
Yeah. And what I read in the Bruce Timm interviews was he has an attachment to Mr. Freeze because of Heart of Ice, which is an episode he directed, and he really he thought that story came out really, really well, and he thought with the way that Freeze was sort of left in the last Batman show that there was some avenue to bring him back and have it be believable, not have it be like, oh, you're just like rehashing stuff.
Right.
That he had an arc to him, and even though he didn't write that episode or direct that episode, he said that he checked in a little more often with how that episode was going.
That's episode Meltdown.
Yeah.
Episode 4, I think, of season 1, 2 episodes after the pilot. Yeah, it's a great episode, and it is again one where like they were able to create the good context for it, so it doesn't feel like it's just a hey, remember Mr. Freeze, here he is. Like they created something that had like tied into heart for all of the characters. Freeze, who doesn't have heart, that's part of it, and Terry as the new Batman, like looking at things differently, and Bruce being the old Batman, looking at things like he always looks at things, and that you find like a truth for all of it somewhere in the middle of all three of those things, which it's a really good episode. I love that episode. One of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a good one. I was not into the show very much after I watched the pilot. I liked the pilot, but like I said, like this is kind of the time where I fell off of their stuff.
Right.
So I didn't watch all of season 1 until I bought the DVD some years later. And then I watched season 1 and I'm like, season 1's really strong. Really, really strong. Like there's a lot of great episodes in there.
Yeah. Season 1's super strong for not being a whole lot of episodes. There's a lot of strong episodes.
Yeah. All right. Before we move on, any final thoughts on the pilot?
I mean, I guess the main thing is I thought like we talked about, I would like a little more fleshing out of just the idea of Terry's. Again, we didn't really get a chance to talk about epilogue. We didn't really spoil that.
Right.
We thought we talked about maybe talk about it towards the end.
Well, that's still
Right.
coming up.
Okay.
Right. Yep. We'll hit epilogue in part 2 for sure.
Okay. All right. So I won't spoil it here, but just the idea that I would like a little more background as to why Terry was able to do what he did, as well as a little bit more about Michael Gross, his dad's character.
A little more fleshed out exposition.
Yeah. Again, and it just, I still, in my mind's eye, I thought this was a longer origin bit. I definitely thought, well, it's 3 episodes, but
Right.
and it could have been a little bit. That I think that would have helped on rewatch. I didn't feel that way the first time, but rewatching, I definitely felt like, it could have used a little more fleshing out of stuff.
Right.
Right.
There's a lot of information really fast.
Right.
One thing I can't really unhear, I have to be honest, and this goes back 25 years now. Wow. And since you brought up John, your old roommate,
Right.
he was the one that told me this, and it stuck with me. And he was saying his critique was he wishes that after all the Batman adventure stuff ended,
Mm-hmm.
and Bruce comes along and hires him,
Mm-hmm.
he wishes that it was like 1 year later,
Yeah.
right? And
I
the
remember
sense
that.
was that Bruce was training Terry for a year
Mm-hmm.
after that before he went back out again. And I actually thought that was kind of a cool idea.
Mm.
Right.
And the more and more I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I think that would have been nice. I think he's right. Because the thing he was saying is just like, I find it hard to think that Bruce would just send somebody out with no training.
Yeah, but again, I like that idea, but again, I like the idea of the on the job training. I do like again. I mean, I get it, but it makes him more like Bruce without. I mean, I don't think he has to be Bruce, and the fact that there's the whole the rebellious idea of he's going to steal the suit and just do it.
Mhm.
Right.
And we talked about the idea that even if he hadn't have done it, he would have found a way to do it without the suit, kind of a thing, or he would have made the attempt, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know.
I guess the argument I'll make against it too is also I think, the suit is there to augment so much.
Right.
Right. Is that it's not really a sense that he's out there with nothing.
Sure. Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But he's got all this, I don't know, on the job training, inherent training or inherent skills. And then he's got a suit that augments his strength. And, it's a lot. It's a mixed bag because we just don't know at that point.
Right. So that's good. So let's get into that then, because we don't have a whole lot of time left. So we'll get into episodes and everything in part 2. But I wanted to ask you guys, like, what did you think about the design of the Batman suit itself and sort of like what it does?
It does a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That suit does a lot.
Yeah.
And it is funny thinking about it in this context though, because it's what Bruce is wearing in the pre-credits
Right.
cold open. So I was like, is that suit 25 years old at the time Terry puts it on?
Well, he makes mention. It's funny you say that because he makes mention of the fact that it's old, but it's still cutting edge.
Right. Yeah, true.
So either, Bruce was ahead of his time or was privy to stuff that was ahead of his time.
Right. I
When it
mean,
was
which doesn't, I mean,
experimental.
he's always been ahead of his time in all
Right.
the versions.
Right. So, yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just something I was thinking about this time where it's like, oh yeah, that's the suit.
I thought of that too. And you know what though? I think and there's something about that kind of like, it does bother me a little bit.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish that they held back on some of the suit capabilities for that pre-credit sequence with Bruce.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. I wish it was stripped down a little bit and not so much augmenting him.
Yeah.
And then I thought it would be cool to kind of go with that thing that John was talking about also, where like it would be neat, I think, if like in the next episode or something like that, there was new stuff that got added to the suit as a protection for
Right.
Terry.
Right.
Yeah, new
Be like,
technology.
we're adding this and everything.
Yeah.
You're still new at this, kid. Like,
Kind of like the training wheels protocol.
yeah.
Just that idea of, no, there's all sorts of things available to you. It's just right now, this is what you got as you're just starting out.
I will say I do kind of like I like the idea that like it's wearable tech.
Mm-hmm.
I think for 99 that was pretty like the idea that it was armored and computerized
Right.
and yet it was something that like he could ball up and throw in his backpack.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I thought was really, really neat. And I like that the cowl reveals his mouth, but it's covered up.
Mhm.
It's always a neat, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
kind of like the Spider-Man eyes. Like
Right.
they're always expressive, but how? But
yeah,
they need to be, so they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it's a nice bit.
yeah.
Mhm.
And that is one thing where I'm just sort of like, yeah, I don't know what the future tech would be like. Sure. It does make me think like how would they do that in a live action?
Right.
That they would have to like CG his mouth in every or makeup.
Yeah. I mean, they're up to it now in visual
Mhm.
effects because we
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
Spider-Man's expressive eyes in a CG suit on a guy wearing a motion capture suit. It'd be doable now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Whether they would want to is another question, but
Sure.
they should and they can.
They've made it so I think he probably will never run out of batarangs.
Yeah, probably.
You know, like there's always at his disposal.
Just like nanotech generates them.
And
Yeah.
I do, and the other thing I dig too is I like that the grappling hook is sort of like a web shooter.
Mm-hmm.
In what way?
Like it shoots out of his wrist, right? It's not like a gun that he
Right.
uses like in the other series. Like it just comes out of his wrist
Right.
or top of his wrist. I'm blanking on what it looks like, but yeah, but it's just something he just shoots out of his hand,
Right.
Right.
which I think is kind of cool.
And he can use like the suit's power to turn it into a stun gun or like a taser of sorts. He uses
Yeah.
it as times to like shock people with it, more or less. If it's not the grappling gun, he shoots something else out of his suit that like shocks people,
Yeah,
which is an interesting idea.
could turn invisible,
Yeah.
which I always like that look of that where they just do like the rim lighting
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
so that the audience can see him. But yeah, but the people on screen, it's you know, he's not there. I think that's really, really kind of cool too. Makes me
Right.
think of Miles.
Right,
Yeah.
for sure. That's what I was
Yeah.
going to say. It definitely reminds. It's very reminiscent Miles Morales of Terry's ability or suit, whereas Miles just the ability.
Yeah, they did some cool stuff. I like the microphone thing on his fingertips too. I think that was neat.
Now when he listens through the windows.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
yeah.
Just picks up on the vibrations, I imagine.
I like that it gives him a lot of stuff, but at the same time, like he'll feel punches.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Oh yeah.
it's a lot of stuff, but it's not a lot of stuff that like that basically makes him invulnerable to any problem or any attack or anything like. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
Right. It's not
You know, there's
full on
still-
armor.
yeah, you can still put him in situations with stakes.
Yeah.
What about some of like the rest of the technology in the world?
It's interesting some of the stuff they hit on that like iPads, everyone uses tech pads, which weren't
Mhm.
new to them. Like it was they pop up in Star Trek, various versions, especially Next Generation. But yeah, it's one that did pan out. So they picked one that was only, I don't know, 10 years off from them when they started. If I'm trying to remember when the tablets started coming out. So that's interesting to see. There's like Roombas around their world.
Right.
It comes up in a later episode where some get rigged with acid. So like little killer Roombas, which I thought was fun because they didn't think like, oh, robot janitor, or they did think robot janitors, but they didn't think like humanoid robot janitors. They were like, that's not going to happen. And we haven't gotten there yet, but like a Roomba, that's a very realistic thing to
Right.
be on the horizon. And I don't think they were quite out yet at the time.
No, I don't
Right.
think so.
And yeah, things like that. The zero gravity highlight sport I like.
Yeah, me too.
It's the right kind of like ridiculous, but yeah, maybe.
Mhm. Right. Right. Possibly.
I don't think they quite nailed it like Star Trek in the way where there's like, oh, like that stuff like weirdly came around, but also
Right.
in their defense, I think Star Trek inspired those inventions in a
Yeah.
weird way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't think I also think that at the time this came out, like it was exceptionally hard to predict where stuff was gonna go.
Mhm.
Right? Where like internet was still novel.
Right. Like
Mhm.
they had just gotten internet.
Yeah.
And they're
know, like,
still
we didn't-
making this show on film. Like they're not
Yeah.
even producing digitally yet.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you know, we were at a point where like writing on CDs was becoming a thing and mini discs and everything. So I could see that they just figured like, oh, well, that technology is still going to stick around in some way. It's just going to be smaller.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things that, I look at. I'm like, okay, like you're almost there,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
and the fact that they they don't have cash, they have basically like gift cards and
Right.
stuff, which I'm like, you were close, like
Yeah.
with a
Right.
cashless society.
Yeah.
You know,
They still have payphones of sorts, which were almost gone in the real world by that point in time.
right.
Every once in a while, like Terry, well, I guess it's like a police call box that he goes and connects to sometimes in episodes, but it looks kind of like a payphone.
Yeah, it's just that it just came out at a time where I think things were about to change very rapidly in the near future for us, not in the show.
Right.
Right.
And I think just it made it predicting it a little tough. So they get a
Yeah.
little leeway for me on this.
Yeah. Big flat panel TVs they got.
Yeah.
What I like though about when they show the news, I thought that interesting. It seemed like the news was done in a way that was supposed to be futuristic, but at the same time, it gave me the feeling of seeing the black and white newscasts in the original Batman series.
Right.
Like when the Batman the Animated Series came out and stuff was in black and white, it made me go, okay, well, some of the technology is not up to date, but it gave me that feel of like, oh, their newscast is it done in the future, but not like the most futuristic way, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not like having a hologram like in your room kind of a thing, which they could have
Right.
gone with, but they didn't.
But their
Right.
newscasters do seem kind of avatar-ish. Like they don't seem like they're real people. They seem
Yeah.
like they're kind of AI generated anchor
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a fun idea. I mean, I guess that wasn't the idea. That's just kind of how they come across to me. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's probably not far off, honestly.
Because they're invisible too.
Yeah.
And it makes me go like, oh, like what are we looking at here?
Right.
Like, is it am I supposed to see the shot behind it like in more clarity? Is that the idea? Like the person is
Like a
not
silhouette.
to be a distraction as much.
Right.
But I do think
Yeah.
that it's like weird and cool.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, it's a fun idea because it's
Yeah.
definitely something you haven't seen before.
Right.
And what did you guys think of the updated Gotham City?
I mean, I love the skyline.
Yeah.
It's cool for all the flying shots.
Mhm.
And being so tall works for now that you've got a Batman that just flies through the city instead of, driving around or swinging.
Mhm.
Like city's got to be taller.
Yeah,
I
I
like
the
the
design.
purple sky.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah.
that was my next thing. Was I like the sky?
Yeah. I remember sort of in their development they were saying like Blade Runner a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we were talking about sort of like our first thoughts when we heard it was announced. Like that was one of the things that got me is they were saying like multicultural Gotham City that was inspired by Blade Runner. I was like, oh man, that's gonna look really cool. Because who didn't think Blade Runner looked incredible the first time they saw it?
Right.
And I remember when it came out, I was a little disappointed because I'm just like, well, it's not like cluttered and claustrophobic like
Mhm.
like like Blade Runner is, which is what I thought they were going for.
Right.
Yeah,
I think there are some limitations in their budget and scope, and design just need to be a little more open. I think for cost saving and efficiency, probably.
I think it was really cool. I wish that we saw a little bit more of the old Gotham City in there too.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing that gets me in the comics that come out after the fact that you see all the time, it's always referred to as Neo Gotham,
Right.
right? And that's an Akira thing for
Right.
sure.
Neo Tokyo. Yep.
But it's not in the show anywhere. It's never called that in the show, and it's always bothered me. And there's a spot in I think it's Shriek where he goes into like basically old Gotham. He goes into the old police department.
Right.
And I like that idea.
Yeah.
I like because it hits me a little bit New Yorky,
Right.
where you have buildings that were built in like 1930 and you have buildings that were built 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because Derek Powers wants to buy it up to tear it down. The old
Right.
city. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun to see.
Yeah.
Like Crime Alley. Still
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I think that would be cool. It got industrial quick though. A lot of big industrial like factory like doors
Right. Yeah.
like everywhere. Yeah. All right, awesome. So, this is end of part 1. Tune in to part 2 next week, and we'll hit some of our favorite episodes. And we'll get into that Justice League epilogue that Frank, you were talking about.
Yes.
So if you guys want to suggest a topic, let us know in the comments. Whatever Twitter X is being called right now, handle LMKHII, or email us at info@letmeknowhowitis.com. You can find links and examples to everything we talk about on letmeknowhowitis.com, where you could also check out all of our past episodes. Just please, however you find us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. And we will see you guys next time.